All of our experience is an upward spiral of time, our two simultaneous time experiences. By Zebra. The idea of time as a loop or a cycle is just an understandable misinterpretation and approximation of the understanding that time is a spiral. It moves forward like a line and cycles like a circle. Time is linear and cyclical. A line is flat and allows no room for pattern, for creative adjustment, and therefore is unfitting to call time linear, for our psychological experience of time is predicated on pattern. In order to discern a pattern within a line, one must go forwards and backwards over it, connecting this dot with that. Here, the layer of nonlinearity is introduced into time by the human mind itself. As what is memory and what is meaning, what is language itself without the ability to connect different moments in time? A circle is round and ends where it began, rather than progressing towards a new outcome. A circle never truly goes forward, but only moves backward. It is a closed circuit. Its signal pathways are deterministic, and it is closed off, as the line is when isolated, shut away from novel, new, or unintroduced integers. Therefore, for several reasons, it is unfitting to call time cyclical, for time can never move backwards, and the introduction of unprecedented integers is the very basis of change in this world, both in our individual lives and in our collective life as a unified species. To call time a line would be to deny the nonlinear functions on which human personality and perception are erected completely. And to call time a circle would be to deny the harsh, or at least impersonal fact that the old conditions of life are always destroyed, recycled, and replaced by new, previously unfamiliar conditions. That, in fact, this give and take is the foundation of evolution in natural systems. Thus, time is neither line nor circle, but spiral. In a spiral, there is forward motion from the bottom and towards the top. A spiral need never go backwards, needs never to end where it began, and can continue in an ascending motion onwards forever. At the same time, despite the linear progression of a spiral upwards, like a line progresses forwards, it remains possible to discern patterns or loops in the spiral's geometry, which are not linear because they always circle around the same place and cover ground which a line alone could never touch. A spiral then includes cycles without violating the law that time can never move backwards, and moves forward without denying the reality that nonlinear meaning-making, connectivity, and pattern is an intrinsic characteristic of human time perception, which is the only perception of time we have. It's a shape, sure, but a more suitable shape for representing time than either our timelines or our cosmic calendars, such as the Yuga system of Hinduism, or the model of the universe we would see when considering the proposed eternal return of Friedrich Nietzsche, can provide us with. To make this graspable, that is what I really mean when I write that time is a spiral, and not just cool and trippy sounding, vague, philosophical, Aryan, and precise, a formula that would have satisfied me when I was an idiot, but which fails me now and fails all of us ultimately. It is necessary to create more fluffy concepts, more shapes, more integers which have hitherto gone unintroduced. Two of these concepts to come are more or less more necessary than any of the others, where the task of understanding time as a spiral in relationship to your experience is concerned. Brain time and body time. These are the two prevalent and prominent dimensions of time which happen simultaneously in our experience, throughout every moment, and which constitute all that we could call time at all. Together, they comprise the totality of any given human experience ever had. Body time refers to the manner in which our physical senses, the eyes, the hearing, the touch, the smell, but taken all together, experience life at any given moment. This sort of time, the sort that we directly experience as a biological organism, is obviously more of a line that moves forward only. The eyes do not see out of order. I am never confronted with the bizarre experience of physically sensing that I might have actually gone to bed before getting ready for bed, for example. That being said, the body is always located in a moment that would, for all intents and purposes, never seem to move forward in time at all, because the body is contained within that point, the moment, which is moving forward, and the body is moving at the same speed as that point, the moment. Moving forward in time at the same rate that time itself is moving would feel to the body, or to anything, like not moving at all, like sitting absolutely still. The knowledge that time is moving forward can only be made utilizing nonlinear meaning-making and pattern. I am in bed now and am not wearing pants. I took my pants off several minutes ago. Therefore, I am not wearing pants because I took my pants off, and time has elapsed since then. In this dimension of our time experience, the meaning-making and pattern, is what I mean by brain time, a concurrent, simultaneously occurring, nonlinear experience of time, which happens alongside and within body time. We call brain time mind. Body time, as it was said, without brain time, would be an experience of life that gives the impression of stillness, of oneness with one's surroundings, of the here and now and only the here and now, without and untethered by connections to previous here and now iterations. It is what we call mind, brain time, which creates the impression that this here and now is causally connected to and thematically correlated with the previous here and now. Without mind, there would be no perception of change, of forward motion, because the contents of experience would change at the same speed as one another. This experience of timelessness within time is well known and has been described variously by mystics and curious hominids as the eternal now, the union of the soul with God, the union of opposites, or simply stillness, peace, being, emptiness, nowness, suchness, and so forth. It is because we have a different sense of time which runs at a different pace from body time, from the here and now picked up by the senses, that we feel dissociated from the here and now, from life as it is in the Zen terminology, and from our bodies at all. But it is also from this split in our time sense which allows us to understand change at all. That which is changing in the same way, at the same pace, and as part of change itself can never identify change. It is too busy changing. The fact that we can pretend to or rightly understand change at all, conceive of change at all, connect one here and now with another here and now at all, proves that we must have a dual or split experience of change. My body, lying in bed, preparing to snooze, observing the ceiling, for example, continues to see the ceiling, to feel the sheets, to smell my feet up-wafting from beneath the blankies, while my brain, or mind, considers how I got there, what I will do when I rise, and what it means that I can smell my feet from way up here. There are two me's, two times, two experiences involved here. There is a split between what the senses are picking up in the here and now, and what the brain is considering as connections and potential patterns between that here and now and others, memorized or anticipated. This must mean that something inside of me, the human organism, perceives time at a slightly different rate than the rate at which time is actually occurring visibly. My sensory experience, what is visible to me, is a line, moving forward and always changing. My mind, that which is invisible in human experience, is a series of loops, connecting this point along the line with that. Together, they form a spiral, but only if we can account for the upward motion, the vertical ascent of the overall movement of a spiral. Together, brain time and body time must form some greater motion which goes up for the shape to fit. So, we've established that only by straddling the two perceptions of time, by seesawing and balancing between the senses and an interpretation of the senses, like an awkward wooden riding horse, can we establish that motion is occurring for the human organism at all. Otherwise, we would all reside in eternity, but we would have nothing to say about it, because no factor of perceptible change was ever introduced. This is likely where many mammals and fish reside, but I would have no way of knowing except gills and fins or a badger torso, which I do not possess that I know of. The distinguishing feature and factor which makes experience human is that it is divided within itself. It is through this division, the division of body and brain time, that we have utilized previous here and nows to approach future and previously future here and nows creatively, as well as for our own material advantage. It is also through this division that we have been able, to an extent, to create mirrors, records, and representations of the past and of ourselves, as well as predict and forecast to a much slimmer extent the likely outcome in regards to what comes next. The question of whether the spiral holds, whether my shape is a better shape, is a better symbol, is a more efficient model for time than past shapes and past models, depends entirely on whether this process of comparison, of information storage, of information transmission from generation to generation, carries an intrinsically upward motion within it. This upward motion symbolically would correlate to what up has always represented symbolically, an increase or evolution of awareness. My spiral argument depends on the hard-won suspicion that there is such a vertical ascending force contained within the loops created by our mental and then physical mirroring of reality, contained within the brain and the body themselves. Therefore, according to this claim, this suspicion, my efforts of idly calculating what I did during the day before bed, during any given night, and staring at my ceiling while laid out horizontally, taken together and extended over a long period of time, of like repetition and amassed experience, result in a greater awareness of what it means to be human, and constitute more than an end within themselves. The body, the line, the mind, the loop, and awareness, the upward force behind the spiral. Thankfully, along with these cushy concepts that I've been cornered by the desire to make clear and to introducing, I brought supplemental synonyms. The function of a synonym, like the function of a mental image, is to approach something from another angle, which is just as spurious and just as inadequate as the first angle, but which, if we're lucky, makes that something more understandable. For brain time, I've brought psychological time, internal time sense, relative time, and inner time. For body time, I've brought biological time, constant time experience, outer time sense, and absolute time. Through even these sparse add-ons, I hope to make it clear that all the experience of mankind which fluctuates, which is internal, which is mental, personal, or private, which constitutes the entirety of what we call the human mind, can be considered as belonging to brain time. And all those experiences of mankind which are constant, which are external, which are physical, impersonal, collective, or public, can be considered as belonging to body time. In drawing this distinction, I face the inevitable downfall of cushy concepts, which is creating the dumb impression that they should be taken literally. There is no such literal distinction between outside and inside. However, this is the way that we experience life, dualistically. And so this is the way I will describe our experience, but not the way that I would describe life itself. Something that differs in my descriptive armory from those descriptive libraries of human thought on human thought in psychology is that it is implicit in my summary of all human experience as consisting of the interplay of brain time and body time, that all human experience is itself made of time. So what is time by my description? Time is change. It has been fashionable to talk about life like there is something which changes, something which change happens to. But this trend, as most trends are, is and will be disregarded from the get-go in my essay. There is nothing that we know which does not change, and therefore there is nothing that we know which change is. Instead, there are only varying degrees of change. The impression that there is anything static or underlying the appearance of change was discredited and rejected by the Buddha, for instance, who put it rather clumsily like this: all things are impermanent, or all composite phenomena are subject to birth, death, and decay. The Buddha also denied that there was any underlying self in the human being. This is that trouble with concepts again, that we are too apt not to see around their corners. If everything which exists is in constant flux and contains nothing beneath or underlying it which is fixed or permanent, then perhaps the self is exactly what it appears to be, rather than some spirit, soul, or personality residing within the appearance. And if there is, in like fashion, nothing which underlies the world, then perhaps the world is what it appears to be. And all that we know ourselves or the world as are dynamic states of change. All human experience, the entirety of what is considered inside the human mind, and the summation of what is directly experienced by the human organism as the external environment, all that has ever been directly experienced through a human body, can thus be said to be identical to time. Instead of there being a thing which time happens to, which time transforms, my argument is that there is a more constant, base, less frequently fluctuating sensory time experience happening against a less constant, surface, descriptive, interpretive, and rapidly shifting mental time experience. This model negates any necessity of assuming a thing which is subject to a transcendental, purely objective force called time, and places everything within human experience into varying degrees and categories of time, or change. Don't worry if the floor falls out from under your feet. There is no floor. There never has been a floor. We imagined it. A crucial point. Cosmology is born from the interface between body time and brain time being misinterpreted. Using the previous paragraph's content as an example, the impression that there ever was a floor, that there ever was a thing which is permanent, and to which impermanence or time happens, was never based on any objective knowledge or stable point of reference, because there is none, but is instead based on the way that body time, external experience, is misinterpreted by the faculties of brain time, internal experience. Because brain time, created as it is by language, memory, and thought, is much less stable within our overall time experience than body time, the bathroom floor will appear basically the same throughout the duration of a midnight dump and magazine reading, or more honestly, phone scrolling session. But from that point of my entrance into the bathroom to the moment of my flushing the toilet, I may have had 20 different narratives, feelings, and seemingly unrelated associative episodes in my mind. Thus, body time remains relatively constant within human experience in comparison to brain time's dreamy, nonlinear, less solid quality. Brain time is apt to misperceive body time as an underlying, permanent, and everlasting reality, whereas all that brain time knows is fleeting like sparks from a campfire at dark, and is mythologized as impermanent, non-physical, and different from that eternal reality. This felt misperception of an absolute reality underlying appearances is responsible for a plethora of cosmologies, both religious and scientific, which all assume a fundamental, unchanging, fixed floor or world soul behind change or time as it's usually conceived. The reason that these cosmological assumptions are so hard to detect in terms of nonsensicality for their upholders and so resonant with the human mind who contacts them is not the objective fact of reality, whatever it is, but the split perception of time in the human organism. The physiological basis of human experience is concretized into these worldviews, maps, or facts, into symbolic representation, and the symbol closely representing the human body-mind is so convincing for that reason, and is too often squandered as to its original purpose, which was to make the basis of human experience understandable to the human organism itself. This sort of understanding is what I envision when I write about awareness, a developed and developing ability of the human organism to grasp and understand the basis of its experience, to know itself. What was once cosmology will later be psychology and anatomy, and then later still common knowledge. The only difference is that the precision of the symbols has become less fluffy and mythopoetic with time. This honing in on what experience really is like, what it's really like to be human, etc., represents a decrease in confusion between brain and body time, a closing of the gap between them, and a gradual decrease in the misinterpretation of body time experience by brain time experience, of matter by mind. The upward spiral, it doesn't end where it began, but because it ascends through loops, it arrives at a similar place, a similar experience, but with a new awareness. Section 2. Gap and Organism, True and False Self. A central axis which must be adhered to extract any valuable meat from the blatherings posted here is the fact that although our overall time experience consists of a phenomenological split between two qualitatively differing, sensationally different, feeling different, sensed as different, simultaneous time experience, both brain time and body time are only two variations, two lenses, two seemingly contradicting worlds, which are both fundamentally aspects of one human organism, any one. This means that what appears and has been described as a mind, as a person, as an ego, or as a soul, is not really who or what we are. That which is described by all those tired names, which are thirsty for their replacements, for more precise symbols who will do better jobs, is actually the dissociation caused by the superficial separation of mind and body into two different time experiences. This is a very difficult point to make or to get, as it contradicts the rudimentary assumptions about self and identity, which have embedded themselves into and replicated themselves through cultures of every kind. So stated again, that which we call mind, the inner voice, the sense of an inner life lived in the brain as a subjective personality, is actually the discrepancy between inner and outer bodily experience. This is a nice way of saying that there is no more room for an eternal spirit, root personality, or essential soul in what I am describing than there is for a floor to the reality we experience externally. We are hyper-intelligent human organisms, experiencing ourselves as if separate from ourselves. We call this dissociation from the physical beings that we are a me. We are identified with a gap in our perception, a split. This split is the foundation of all personal identity. Sitting here now, reading this, the words are processed by the mind, by brain time. Feel that. This linguistic processing is occurring within the constant time experience of body time, the sensory experience. Brain time is variable and happens within body time, which is constant. Brain time is discontinuous and body time is not, meaning we can experience body time experience without virtually any sense of brain time experience at all, but we cannot experience brain time experience entirely with no body time experience at all. I may find myself watching my backyard without thinking, but I will not find myself thinking without any form to contain those thoughts. The important thing to understand about psychological time is that it is self-contained and that it depends on variables, that is, on multiple different signals, to arise as a dimension of time experience at all. Psychological time is not intrinsic. It is an emergent or conditioned experience of the world which emerges from the human organism, from body time. This is problematic for many human organisms to yet understand, specifically because of conditioned or emergent experiences, and because we have identified with those conditioned emergent characteristics of our beings. The practical abilities provided us by reflecting on our experience have led many to stray from the larger time experience into identification with the smaller time experience occurring within it, the mind, the ego, or the me. The familiarity we've developed with the mental aspects of our overall experience has led to a lack of familiarity with the sort of experience that those mental aspects have emerged from. It is considered strange to talk of not thinking, but thinking itself has only arisen as a conditioned, discontinuous, functional tool for trying to relate to that experience which we are always thinking about. Being alive, being human, being here. There is no way to think about anything other than that which cannot be thought about, life itself. And this should be a clear clue that the physical world of appearances is the most substantial thing that any of us have. The gap between what is thought and what is thought about is yet another clever synonymous way of stating what I mean by brain and body time, or what is thought and what is thinking, either way. There is no way of experiencing that we are what we appear to be outside, from inside, and so it's easier to cut corners and to assume that the inside, the thinking half of the human organism, must be who and what we are. This leads to all sorts of cosmological misfires, the immortality of the soul, and the inhabitation of the flesh. Actually, it is the flesh which is inhabiting itself. Life, as the human body experiences it, can only be made an object of reflection when a mind, a simultaneous and differing experience of time, is available within it. The human body is and has always been the true self. The mind or gap has always functioned as a substitute or false self. The creation of a new awareness, an awareness of the human organism of its own functioning, involves closing this gap and returning to a unified experience of life. The spiral, it might be remembered, is also the shape of DNA, a double helix. Section 3. Synchronized time experience. What does it say? The upward motion of self-awareness is the means both by which psychological time has been separated experientially from biological time experience, and the means by which the two may once again become synchronized. This alchemical fact of our biology is the substrate of more than many mythological images. The two fish swimming in opposing directions, which form a single current. The fall of Lucifer from the Godhead, and the divine drama ensuing. The proclamation that Atman is Brahman, mind is body. The result of synchronization is the experience of timelessness. But although most of us will experience this in varying intensities throughout our lives, the difficulty remains in understanding that this experience of timelessness is actually not an experience in the ordinary sense at all, but a recollection of what monkey mystic U.G. Krishnamurti referred to as the natural state. That is, what might be called the experience of the now of Tao of oneness, is actually the recollection of the human organism of the sort of overall time experience which was available to it before the introduction of the gap, of conditioned mental aspects and mistaken identities born therein. That this state is in fact identical to what the human organism is. Thus, in Zen, it's sometimes asked of the student by the teacher to show me your original face before you were born. The you who is born in this allegorical riddle is the conditioned perception of time created inside the human brain, which plays against the constant time experience of the body, the original face. The experience of timelessness, which, we must remember, I've shown is not actually timelessness, but the absence of a pronounced secondary and conflicting experience of time itself, is not necessarily a stopping or a diminishment of brain time at all, but that just as one cannot distinguish forward motion if one is moving at the same speed as one's surroundings, the brain and body time experiences have themselves synchronized, and therefore have become indistinguishable. This I'll refer to henceforth as unified or synchronized time experience. As body time contains brain time, so might brain time be experienced as disappearing or vanishing into body time during a unified or synchronized time experience, described variously as no mind, emptiness, unity, or a flow state. The gap between brain and body time, again, has only come to be identifiable to us as brain time or mind due to the discrepancy it presents against our sensory time experience. So naturally, it is easy to miss in a state of non-differentiation between inner and outer when we have experienced the mind all of our lives as that which is running at a different rate by different laws within the present moment. The key insight which the experience of synchronized time, of unified mind and body, offers to us is that the organism doesn't function in the way that we think it does. Remember, although it is dual time experience, which is currently more common than unified time experience is a more accurate picture of the natural state of mankind. The awareness has simply not yet been generated to sustain unified time experience for longer than short or at best fleeting if long glimpses. The central goal of mysticism has always been to reprogram the biological machinery of the human body to reorient itself to its natural state, synchronized time experience. The now on a new level of awareness which includes and transcends both the original egolessness of the body, or the animal condition, and the limited reflective consciousness of the ego-filtered intermediate stage of human evolution, mind, into a combined whole. This is self-synchronization, when all the superior, dominant, and inferior functional aspects of any given human being are harmonized with one another as a unified overall creature. Mysticism in this way is a way of getting the jump start on future stages of human biology, and by doing so, introducing those stages into earlier epochs at an earlier time. This way, the glimpses gradually prolong themselves into what will later be effortless. So, what does synchronized time experience tell us about the actual functioning of the biological organisms that we are? It tells us the most, as so many wise teachers do, through what it takes away. Among the most misguided illusions created by our reflective capabilities, the sense of being able to watch ourselves as ourselves, is that we, the mind, the brain, or the soul, are in control of the body, which is merely a vessel or extension of the reflective consciousness created by the overlap between differing brain and body time rates. But what if the body is actually in control of the mind, and is merely using the mind to gather intel on itself, for purposes of leading towards the point where it will be able to recognize its own sovereignty, autonomy, and individuality? This is what a comprehensive investigation of synchronized time experience through mystical science, a methodology of exploring oneself through direct experience, will reveal. That the unconscious is always and has always been in charge of the conscious mind, and that we are this unconscious being, which is gradually coming to consciousness, to an integration of the conscious mind into a more holistic state of operations. Section 4. Integrating time gaps. How to move with the upward motion. A feedback loop is a self-propelling structure of communication within itself that maintains a certain pattern, whereas an open feedback loop might be considered as a pattern like this, except one that is capable of gradually evolving, transforming, and changing with enough repetition. The inner sense of time, which probably cannot accurately be considered as autonomous or independent in any way from the more inclusive and larger or dominant containing category of body time experience, seems to move upward and in a circle, as does this essay. That is, it is a feedback loop because it's circular, but it is an open feedback loop because it moves up. For instance, I can all at once remember an emotive memory that's important to me in some sense, or associated with a powerful affect, a powerful emotion, feel that emotion, and for all intents and purposes experience that other time remembered, while also sitting here, however many years later, in the body's physical location in the present. And then, a year later after this recollection, I could revisit the same location in my memory, the same sense of time hooked to this same particular emotion and memory, but as a result of a different trigger or different catalyst activating stimuli, and also with a different outlook, and get something entirely different from that same pocket of time experience within the big me. I may look bitterly at an argument 2 weeks after the fact, but look wistfully and with humor, having learned something about myself from it by then, a decade later. So although the same imprint is getting activated within the brain-time circuitry, it is related to in a manner which is essentially new, from a newer awareness, partially influenced and promoted by that old experience, and by the various experiences which were unavailable at the initial occurrence. In this given example, we can trace out the spiral's impression very clearly, an open feedback loop which moves upward. Braintime's repetitious associations that breed familiarity with our triggers, with the aspects of mind which are thematically correlated with the underlying forces dwelling in our memories, emotions, drives, motivations, behaviors, thoughts, feelings, and dreams, is what opens any possibility of recognizing patterns within itself, within ourselves, and even just recognizing a pattern, whether of affect, thought, sensation, sense of self, identity, or perception, is an upward motion in self-awareness, is the same process as evolution itself. We can also move down in brain-time experience. This is what is usually called regression, in which a past time experience and attached sense of self seem to overshadow and invade our lives in body time, in the constant. An example of what predominance of brain time rather than body time might look like. We can conceive of memories, of nostalgia, as relatively minor downward movements or apparently downward movements within brain time, within mind, within the eternal body, the Tao which cannot be departed from. Apparently so, because even downward movements within a circular pattern which generally is trending upwards are ultimately or finally revealed to be upwardly directed. This is what it means to learn from mistakes, to mature, to grow, to deal with your bullshit. Not to be absent of such dips, but to integrate the implications of each dip, to integrate or upwardly consolidate the total pattern of one's mind, to contextualize the brain's separated voyages and fancies within the overall movement of evolution engrammed into the human body. To point at a pop culture theme, there is the issue of the dead coming back to life, of a zombie apocalypse, of a resurfacing of the deceased. This is a symbolic archetypal expression, like all mythological artistic images, of an internal dynamic occurring between the mind aspect and body aspect of the total human being. What it means for zombies to arise from crypts is for the past to invade the present. For, as PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, illustrates, an aspect of the past, the circularly orchestrated stored patterns of brain time experience, to break into and dominate the current experience, the present surroundings within the body's actual sensory experience. That such a theme is of interest, a source of fascination to so many people, merely hints at the underlying problem facing us human animals today, between eras, as we graduate from one floor to another of the spiral arc of the forward flow. It is a theme which tells us to be wary of allowing the subservient or lesser category of our being to assume a position which is dominant, or at odds with the genuinely dominant or greater category of our being. On the other hand, there is the theme of a mass awakening, of a dimensional jump, or of an apocalypse, which taken allegorically is not necessarily a bad thing, but a signal of an all or none change struggling to occur. The experience of body time is a very positive experience, a plus or upwardly directed time experience, which one can learn to stay with more and more through mystical science, through experimentation, through practice. Carl Jung once described a vision in his Red Book of having to eat a god, of shrinking it and taking its power away. This can be seen as the alternative route to the zombie scenario. The past, the dragging time rate which falls behind the constant, is herein absorbed and swallowed by the present. This is the harmonious outcome, because the dominant aspect of our being is given its rightful place within the many-layered time onion, which is inside of every human organism. So, any movement upwards in consciousness and self-comprehension and self-knowledge and self-awareness is movement towards the rate in which body time is moving, on the part of the lagging time rate, brain time, which is distinct from its goal to the degree that is moving at a different rate, dissociated or out of synchrony with the constant time rate, sensory experience itself. Higher consciousness is thus the degree of seamlessness, of simultaneity, of the two or more, as brain time is plural, fractured, and multiple, time rates or time experiences within any human form. It is a direct awareness of what's there, rather than an executive function or superior ability of humans as distinct from their neighboring species, in which thought is somehow correlated with consciousness. If consciousness is to be consciousness at all, it cannot be considered as an activity of thinking, because thinking is only an epiphenomenon which becomes possible when the total being is split into at least two distinct time rates. And the net effect of this split state is to put the total being at conflict with itself. Consciousness must be considered as the ability to harmonize every varying time rate into a greater whole, not as the ability for one time rate to analyze or observe another. Section 5. The myth of consciousness in its traditional form. Consciousness in its traditional definition means an awareness of something. If I, within this framework, am simply watching birds flock and gather, I am not conscious. But if I were to zoom in or focus upon the details of the crow's beak, or to notice the way that his surrounding murder, flock, appears distinct from the clouds behind them, then I am conscious, by traditional understanding, that is. The time lag theory implies that the reversal of this assumption is closer to the truth. So according to this framework I am introducing, I am not conscious if I observe the grains of the crow's beak apart from the surroundings, but actually reside in split awareness, in dual consciousness. The senses continue to see the total picture, the park, the sky, the trees, and the benches all together, while the mind, the dissociated time rate, falls behind, separates, and analyzes the specific zoomed-in aspect of the constant overall experience I am having then. What has happened then is that some part of the big me, the total being always here as long as I'm alive, has split off from, distinguished itself from, and left behind the rest of me. I have become two or more. I have split into two distinct me aspects. This is the traditional idea of what consciousness is. The root definition found in nearly every definition, even if behind the scenes. We cannot say that I, the park goer, the bird watcher, am conscious at all in this example, but that only a portion of me is. That is, I, the total human organism, which includes all the operations of the mind and the body, am not present. I am not aware because I am two things. So one part, the mind, is conscious, while the being aspect, the constant time experience, goes offline, goes unconscious. This is the relative absence of correlation between our two basic parts, which threatens us as modern men and women. It is not conscious living at all, but a split dyadic perception of life. The traditional definition behind all definitions of consciousness is identical to the aggregate ego, to the false identity construct, which is identical to the gap between brain time and body time. Ego equals gap equals consciousness equals mind equals split state equals brain time. The ego is the entirety of mental noise, of brain time experience lagging behind its central time experience, present within any given moment. The ego is not the actual biological self, but the distance of that self from itself. This revelation is amongst the most ancient, common, and often referenced realizations within the history of mystical science. However, the misconception that lurks under the surface level or superficial interpretations of this realization, an example of which is the teaching of anatta, or no self, in Gautama the Buddha's teachings hundreds of years BC, is that the ego is an illusion, that it is simply unreal. This misconception is amongst the most devastating of popular misunderstandings regarding mystical science, self-synchronization, and awakening, anamnesis, loss of forgetfulness, gnosis, or enlightenment. The fact remains that the aggregate ego, the mind, is a real and felt dimension of brain-time experience, but that although it is mistaken for the self, it is not. That does not mean that the ego, that the myth of consciousness, is not at all in any way real. No. Assuming so will have the same effects that teaching a child that their buttocks is an illusion will produce. Cognitive dissonance, or more accurately, a dissonance within the entire being between its mental cognitive aspect and its physical or sensation-based aspect within its overall time experience. For this reason, I am always sure to clarify when asked about the teaching of no self in any of its popular manifestations, that the ego, that brain time itself, is not an illusion, but illusory, i.e. not what it seems to be. The ego is a lesser category, a contained category of one's total psychophysical being, but it is not the self. Section 6. What no self really means for the self. So, synchronized time experience is not an experience in the same way that anything produced within brain time experience is an experience. Because as mentioned, brain time is fundamentally discontinuous, multiple or plural, unstable, indefinite, and dissociative in its nature. Everything in brain time which is experienced falls within the limits of memory, of thinking, of mind. These are all experiences which involve an experiencer, a split-off portion of the self, a habitual imprint within memory, within the contained past, a lagging time rate which has taken on its own gravity in opposition to the whole being's rhythm. What no self, no personality, or no ego then means for the self is that anything which is a brain-time-based or ego-based experience is not the self. As Vedantic mystics are quick to remind us, that which comes and goes is unreal. A more precise way of wording this is to say, that which can be perceived as coming and going is not who I am. In one time, synchronized time experience, or no time, consciousness disappears, because we cannot be aware of ourselves and be ourself at the same time. That is, when there is no split perception between our time senses, we cannot be aware of the self as if it is separate from us. Ego, the observer complex, that which watches or can witness the body in its direct experience, is predicated upon this very sensation, that we, as ourself, are observing what we are already observing. The eyes see a total picture, and the eyes within the eyes see details of that picture at the same time, a split me perception. So, the ego, the brain-time stockpile of impressions, is not an illusion, but it is false, meaning it presents itself as other than what it is. The zombies have come wearing office uniforms, claiming to be our neighbors. The mind is not an illusion, it is an imposter, an imitator. This is why consciousness is one of the factors which must cease in Buddhist thought in order for a practitioner to exit the wheel of becoming. For nirvana synchronized time to occur, the spectrum of dual time, of two times, of inner versus outer time experience must close. The gap must close. This means that everything we have taken to be ourselves within the confines of the mind must disappear from our overall experience. That the fluctuating thinking inside of us must come to a rest. This is the oft-mentioned silence of the mystics. It is when there is no mental noise, no time lag between the inner and outer aspects, between the mind and the body. Thought is less like a tool or an instrument and more like static or interference caused by the friction of two seemingly opposing objects in motion from the view of the self. And in the self, in silence, it has its relative end. Section 7. Split perception and the possibility of objectivity. Our self is a temporal experience, an experience of time, just like our false self or false selves, varying time gaps are temporal experiences. The only difference is that the self involves only one or close to one time experience. while the other involves two or more conflicting patterns of perception, ego or egos. The overwhelming fact of the objective world as a transpersonal reality can only be known within synced time, within a harmonized outlook of both the mental and physical sensory experiences. An experience which has been made one experience. The basic proclamation that the objective world is real and transcendent to our limited and confined subjectivities is foundational to the scientific outlook, to the scientific method, to extroverted sciences or natural sciences taken as a mass. What has not been understood by these types is the need for the application of mystical science, of some methodology of closing the gap between time perceptions, in order for objectivity to even become possible. For this reason, too much scientific debate still becomes ideological, dogmatic, and falls short when it comes to impartial exchange. Because both body and brain time are parts, functions, or views of the self of the total human organism, but are only discernible to the degree that one time, the natural state, is chopped into a dualistic split-time experience consisting of a distinct brain time, or mind, and a distinct body time, or experienced body, we have conflicting impressions of what is real or objective. The hypothesis of the objective world as a single type of time that both brain and body time are relatively distinct perceptions of, while not necessarily false or inaccurate, is premature so long as we have two contradictory experiences of that reality, one sensory and one mental. The question of whether the experience of one time or reality in an objective sense may not be the experience of one world, but the experience of two temporal realities, which have reached a simultaneity and become parallel as to feel indistinguishable, is therefore still pertinent and begs the further question of just what is brain time or psychological time anyhow? What is thought? For this reason, amongst other ambiguities, I am not trying to impress any intellectual types with any contribution of extroverted scientific knowledge in writing this paper, but am exercising a way of saying our experience as to make it visible to us, i.e. understandable to the individual reading it. Thus, the time-lag theory cannot be considered a scientific, nor even a philosophical or psychological theory, but a descriptive theory, a way of talking about something which is universal, of using language to illuminate that which language can only refer to. Section 8. Language, Mind, and Time, the central claim. What does it mean that all experience is time? This, as the hallmark of my theory of description, is the key distinction between it and other linguistic systems. The assertion that I am making is that there is no experience of or category of time, but that there is only time. It is a semantic assertion, meaning pertaining to the method of description, language. Yet by adjusting language so that it is no longer inadequate when it comes to the finger pointing at the moon, the finger of language pointing at the nature of human experience, then more is accomplished than simply flipping a few letters around, because language is the same thing as mind or brain time, as the experience of language is almost entirely, if not entirely, the experience of attempting to understand body time from within brain time, an internal experience. There is really one core point to my essay, that our experience of time, that is, our experience in general, consists of two different and simultaneous speeds or rates, and that awakening, enlightenment, or self-synchronization, which is the attainment of a higher degree of synchronicity between inner and outer time experience, is real, is possible, and is important. For too long, these descriptors have remained vague, imprecise, and lofty to the layperson, to the unenlightened, to the ignorant, when in fact they simply describe the pinnacle, the point, the highest potential of human experience and human nature. Everybody is capable of understanding what enlightenment is when the causes of ignorance are made visible to them. It makes more sense to talk of what prevents enlightenment than to talk of what can lead to it. Self-synchronization is important because ordinary experience is split down the middle and inaccurate, and because the nature of split time perception is always to misapprehend itself as the one-time experience, to imitate or echo the natural state. In fact, split time can only communicate about split time. Thoughts equal consciousness equal language equal psychological experience equal brain time equal split time perception. And therefore, thoughts or language, just like brain time in relationship to body time, can only approximate our authentic being. As the spiral of our dual temporal experience moves towards higher consciousness, we experience to that degree a lessening of mental chatter, of inner noise. And as it moves further away from one time, as brain time lags further behind body time, this inner noise is augmented to alarming degrees, manifesting as psychosis or loss of touch with reality, an individual's inability to perceive body time or common time. We pathologize these downward motions in the spiral of human experience for a variety of complicated reasons. But one reason is that on some level, the level that's always there in the background of the split perception, we understand that the dominance of brain time, subjectivized time reality perception, over body time, objective time reality experience, is truly a break from reality, that it amounts to a devastating dissociation between two aspects of our total being. But what we are not so apt to acknowledge is that we all suffer from a similar psychosis to a much lesser, though still prominent and maladaptive degree. In the opposite extremes direction, those who are functioning within a relatively profound degree of synchronized time experience are lauded as saints or gurus or spiritual teachers, or killed off as heretics. It seems obvious by now that because a greater synchrony between brain and body time experience is also a lesser degree of dissociative separation from objective experience, the objective world, that one's behavior in such a state would appear transcendently rational, mysterious, shocking, transparent, or just plain real and special to everyone still operating within split time perception. Someone living in one time takes on a numinous or spiritual aura of transcendent authenticity or transcendent reality, because reality itself is transcendent to split time, which amount to nothing but an approximation of the real world. Thus, what we consider to be ourselves is an approximation of a self which is not yet real, fully actualized, synchronized, aware. And what we consider to be real is only a guess at the real world. Section 9. Tomorrow, today. Potential within the actual. Here is where things get less straightforward, right where I leave you off to absorb, integrate, and consider this information in your own way, to assimilate its content into your mystical science, the functioning of your true being, the organism as a whole. This is one of the novel, newfound, and unfamiliar contributions of my forthcoming book, Elephant Tusk: How Human Beings May Have, Will Have, Became to Be Free. That in terms of what we experience within split time perception and the ego from the mind, reality and our real self are in the future. Because our historical experience of the world has been comprised of two conflicting perceptions at all times, which are split from one another, and because the experience of one time, which is the closest we can get to the experience of an objective world, is not functional nor available within the experience of split time, split mind, split body, the largest implication, the largest possibility, the largest mind blower we have to face is that we may not yet be real selves in a real world at all. There's a simple argument for this even found within the arc of this essay, that it is not only on an intellectual or psychological level that a jump from the egoic portion of the spiral to the self portion changes our reality, but also our behavior, relationship with the world, sense of identity, basic experience of life, felt experience as a body, everything that makes us who we are. All of this is evidently immeasurably different when we are in one time or no time, and therefore we may really, that is physically, be a different self depending on the degree of divergence between body time and brain time. In the same way that we don't have experiences of time, but that time is what all of our experiences are made out of, nouns are verbs, objects are processes, we have to begin to realize, as odd as it may seem, that we do not have a brain at all, for instance, which undergoes neurochemical fluctuations, but that it is more accurate to say that we have a series of different brains which are neurochemically unalike. And because the brain regulates and is regulated by the totality of the other bodily processes, we actually have a spectrum of bodies which are physically unalike. And finally, that the ego is not something that the self identifies with, but a composite of different semi-selves which approximate but are ultimately different from the self. To make the argument that reality itself is not yet real is only a matter of equating objective reality with experience itself, because in the experiential spectrum of moving towards greater degrees of dual-time synchronization, we experience both a pervasive feeling of increased reality of ourselves, hence the idea of a true self, as well as a literal sensory sensual experience of the objective world that appears more real and sharp, defined, and definite. This is an independently verifiable claim. It is a fact which anyone who can investigate will discover. So then, as I suggest in Elephant Tusk, whether reality itself is becoming real is only a matter of what type of reality we ascribe to experience, to whether or not human experience is of a single reality or a spectrum of different degrees of reality. And if this is the case, arguing that reality was even there to begin with amounts to an unnecessary assumption that is unverifiable. It is actually therefore logically more feasible to consider that reality becomes real with us. The spiral model is not only a way of describing psychological growth, but also biological evolution, as well as the evolution of the cosmos itself, because all three of these modes of growth together represent the ongoing creation of reality with the creation of humanity. It is a variety of differentiated aspects, moving towards a greater degree of definiteness in the on-as-yet manifest future. The self is a potential of the not-self. The objective world is a result of a dream, and the mind is only a way station between the false beginning and the true beginning. That beginning is now.